firstly, I am a psychiatrist. So I'm a physician who treats people who have emotional problems and challenges. And I'm currently working at Columbia University in Manhattan, and I'm doing research to try to develop ways to increase mental health awareness, education, and treatment for depression among African Americans. And the way that I've done that is to partner with faith-based organizations to collaborate with clergy and with community members to spread the word out on how to provide people the care that they need. And so this is the issue that has deeply affected me and is a ministry to me. This is not just my job, but I feel like this is my professional and personal calling. So I'm just from a very, very small town of Virginia called Fredericksburg. It's right in the middle of DC and Richmond. And I was raised in a Baptist church. My dad's a deacon, and my mom plays the piano for the little kids choir. And growing up, I heard throughout church and in the black community, you know, if you're depressed, then it means that your relationship with God is out of whack. Or if you're depressed, then something is wrong with your prayer life, or you're not tithing enough. Right? So that depression was a consequence of something that we had done wrong. And so, you know, this is one thing that we're battling against. And depression has affected my family. Both of my parents have struggled with depression. And I'm transparent enough to tell you all that I've struggled with depression. And I currently see a therapist every single week. And it has been one of the best decisions that I've ever made. Also one of the scariest, because it makes me look at myself in ways that I didn't really want to think about, and make me talk about things that I didn't want to talk about, and make me look at myself in a way that I didn't even know was there. And so this isn't something that I'm telling you to do because it's what I do for work, but I'm telling you it's something that we as men need to do because our children need it, our families need it, our communities need it. And so I'm asking you to not only spread the word, but to join me in this process of addressing these issues. So I'd like to start off telling you about a guy, let's call him Jamal, and tell you about his story. So Jamal is a 37-year-old single man who has joint custody of his 2 young children. Previously, he was known as being encouraging and embracing people's ideas, but now he cuts people off in an abrasive manner, and he's really, really irritable. He was recently exposed for sleeping with 3 different women at the same time. And coworkers at his job say that he appears lethargic, he's tired, he's noticeably gained weight over the last 2 months. His hobbies do not give him pleasure anymore. He doesn't even enjoy watching basketball. So tonight, when Miami beats Boston, he would get when Miami beats Boston, he would get no pleasure out of that. He would get no pleasure out of that.
You wanted it right.
And he often complains of getting headaches and having stomach pain. And he feels guilty and worthless for behaving in ways that go against his principles. And he feels like he's not being his true self. Maybe some of you know someone like Jamal. Maybe Jamal was your father. Maybe Jamal was your cousin. Maybe Jamal is you. But just think about what Jamal is going through. So as a psychiatrist, when I talk about clinical depression, I'm talking about major depression. And so this is basically, it's a medical illness that is a 2-week period of depressed mood. So you're feeling depressed, you're sad, you're down in the dumps. Or also, particularly among men, as was illustrated in Jamal's case, irritability can be a huge symptom of depression. Or lack of pleasure or enjoyment in the activities that you used to enjoy, not getting any enjoyment out of anything. So you have to have at least one of these symptoms for at least 2 weeks. And then for clinical depression, when I say clinical depression, okay, we'll talk about kind of the difference between clinical and just kind of going difficult times and downs in the dumps. But when I say depression as a psychiatrist, I mean clinical depression. So it's 2 weeks. And then you have problems with sleep. So we talked about either sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. Feelings of guilt or worthlessness. In particular, among men, it can be guilty about not being able to be there for your kids, guilty about not working, guilty about whatever it may be. And the self-esteem issue, that's where the worthlessness comes in. So your energy is low. So you feel tired all the time. You just don't have enough to keep going anymore. And then you have problems concentrating. Or you have difficulty making decisions, and that's where the confusion comes in. And then you have difficulties with your appetite. Just like with sleep, you may eat more than normal and gain weight, or people may not eat at all and may lose a lot of weight. And then people sometimes get just restless. You'll see people just really fidgety and wringing their hands all the time, or just really slowed down. Kind of like their pipes, their arms are like pipes or like lead. And then body aches. In particular, among African American and Latino men, we tend to manifest depression through physical symptoms. A large part of that is because we do not express our emotions well. We have difficulty expressing our emotions well. So sometimes when people just have, if you're having a headache for 2 weeks, you're not concentrating, and you say, oh man, maybe I just have migraines. That could be a sign of depression. Also stomach pains. So people can get diarrhea. It's kind of like if you're thinking about a big game and you get the runs, right? Because you're anxious or you're just really kind of amped up. That can also be a sign of depression if it is for an extended period of time. And then you mentioned suicidal thoughts. Suicidal thoughts, thoughts of death, thoughts of not wanting to be here are part of the symptoms of clinical depression. And so if you have depressed mood or irritability and lack of interest in your activities, and then 4 out of these other symptoms, then if I see you in my office, then I would say that you meet the criteria for clinical depression. Depression is destroying the black community, and it's something that we're not talking about. And so when people look at national surveys, they look at people from every state, all different levels of education, all different levels of income, and they compare people who have depression, African Americans who are depressed compared to white Americans who are depressed have a form of illness that is more persistent, so that it lasts a longer period of time. It's more disabling. So if an African American person is depressed, 9 times out of 10 they're going to miss more days out of work than someone who is a white American. It's also more resistant to treatment, and it's more severe. So this is something that is truly, truly, truly impacting our community. Depression has a huge association with HIV and AIDS and with all other medical conditions. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Why would depression be associated with other medical conditions?
Because you're internalizing everything.
Right, so you're internalizing stuff.
But it may be terminal, but you feel, well, this is it.
Might act out.
Right. So you act out, you may get terminal, you may give up. So, and go ahead.
Yeah. You're also not thinking about risk because you have this black.
Exactly, exactly. And so in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
Like you said, he was dating 3 different women.
Right. Right.
That could lead into HIV.
Exactly. Exactly. And so depression is a huge risk factor for people engaging in risky sexual behavior, which then puts you at risk for HIV/AIDS, which then puts you at risk for everything that we know about with HIV and AIDS. Okay? In addition, if you have a chronic medical illness like hypertension, which there's more hypertension among African American men than among other ethnic groups, if you have diabetes, if you have cancer, then that makes you more likely then to become depressed. And then that increases people's risk for not taking their medications, for not going to see their doctor, for not getting the medical care that they need, which then can make their medical condition worse. So people like to talk about, oh, well, it's just in your mind, and try to separate mental health from physical health. But what I'd like to suggest to you all is that your health is your health. And your mental, your physical, and even your spiritual health, we can't really separate. And so depression is really the center of a vicious cycle of poor health. Chronic stressors. What type of stressors do you all have? What makes you stressed out? Women. Women, right. Money. So relationship stress, financial stress. Work stress. What do you all have in common?
Family, children.
Children. Do your children stress you out from time to time? On a regular basis, right?
ACS in the courts.
That is very real. So, you know, in Jamal's story, he had joint custody, but that is a real thing. The financial stress associated with having to pay that every month. Not being able to see your kids wanting to see you. All these things are stressful, okay? Living in Manhattan or in a highly populated area, we don't live in this every day. So all these things are risk factors for depression, and then depression, like we talked about, can make heart disease, high blood pressure, obesity, HIV and AIDS, cancer, other medical conditions make that worse. And then depression is also a risk factor for those conditions. So depression really is at the center of your health. And so depression, despite all this, depression is undertreated among African Americans and Latinos, in particular among men. A lot of people say depression is a choice. You can choose not to be depressed, right? Or you're choosing to be depressed. That's what I hear a lot of folks say. You're choosing to be depressed, so you can just snap out of it and choose not to be depressed. Yeah.
Do you believe in that?
No.
Okay.
No. I do believe that the depression is a medical illness. I do believe that there are treatments that can help you get out of depression. And so what I don't want to say is that to use depression as a crutch, okay, for your behavior. But I do not believe that depression necessarily is a choice, and that it's just something that you can turn on or turn off. Okay? And when I say depression, I'm meaning clinical depression like I defined earlier. Yes? Right. Right. Yeah. So depression is a sign of weakness, especially among men. It's rare. Depression is very common. Statistics show that 1 out of 5 people are going to have an episode of clinical depression throughout their lifetime. So it's very common. People say depression is just a white disease. Black folks don't get depressed. The laughter I'm going to say to me is that this is another myth. So another reason, like you said, is the concern of going to a psychiatrist, that people who are depressed or who have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or whatever mental illness it may be, you're going to be locked away. You're not going to be able to see your kids. And this keeps people from getting treatment. Prayer is an extremely important part of, if we talked about, depression healing or treatment, prayer is an extremely important part of that. And that African Americans who are depressed say that, I want to pray, I need to read scriptures. That's a very important part of that, yes. But it's also kind of a catch-22, because there's the notion that if you're clinically depressed, that's all that you have to do. That all you have to do is pray. That's a very prevailing notion in our community, that all you have to do is pray. All you have to do is fast, and you'll be instantaneously healed. Now, I certainly believe in the power of prayer. I certainly believe that people can be healed. But I'm saying that many people need prayer and something else to get them out of the episode of clinical depression. And African Americans also prefer to talk to someone, prefer counseling over taking medications. And so I'm a psychiatrist, so I do prescribe medications, but it's not the first line of treatment that I use for everyone. And so given the fact that prayer and counseling is a very important part of depression treatment. And one of my favorite quotes from one of the ministers at Allen is, they were very, very enthusiastic about providing church-based care. And they said, we can't just keep going on and acting like everything is fine on the surface, when underneath there's a lot of stuff going on. And she said, we can't keep going on Sunday to Sunday and staying high on emotions. We want to see people's lives really be changed. And so the last part of my talk today, I'm just going to talk to you about how we can begin to have this conversation, and how we can change lives, and how we can overcome the stigma that is associated with depression. And we do this by healing. the first part of healing is just honesty. This is probably the most important and also the most difficult part of overcoming the stigma that's associated with depression, for all the reasons that you all mentioned. When admitting something is wrong with your thoughts, with your actions, or with your behavior. And the most important thing is to find someone that you trust, okay? Admitting these feelings is a very vulnerable place to be. And as men, we don't like to be vulnerable. We don't like to come across as feeling weak. So finding someone you trust, that can be another man, that can be a mentor, that can be your mother, father, that can be your girlfriend, wife, whoever it is, but find someone you trust. And then get education. Don't just go on, we can't keep going on these myths and let stigma dominate our culture, but we have to educate ourselves by reading and attending workshops and going to conferences where people who have had depression and gotten treatment and gotten healed are speaking so that they can share their positive experiences with working with a psychiatrist or with a counselor, and so that they can help dispel some of that stigma through their personal experience. And then advocacy. If you all are interested in this information, I can certainly leave it with Scott and provide it to you afterwards, but there's a lot of information that, a lot of groups that provide advocacy, that provide support for people to get the care that they need. And then we have to realize that, look at the long-term course. So depression is a chronic illness, and people have relapses. So even if everything is going well, if you're doing everything right, sometimes people can slip back into a state of depression. And it's important to realize that we have to look at the long-term course of this disease. And then actively discuss your symptoms with your provider if you are getting treatment. And then, most important thing I hope that you all remember is to initiate treatment early. If you're concerned that something is wrong, if you think that you may be going through something, a bout of depression, or if you're not even sure what it is, see someone. See someone as soon as possible. And if there's a real threat of suicide, like we talked about suicide earlier, you need to call 911 or go to the emergency room. And then, in the African American community, we say that it takes a village to raise a child. And so what you all are doing now, you're networking. You're developing partnerships. You're developing a brotherhood. And this is an important network for you to continue and for you to grow. And you can use this network to support each other and to support other people who aren't here, to educate them, because surely there are people in your lives who you think may be depressed now, or they may be going through something. And you can take what you've learned this weekend back to them. And then just continue to grow. As we continue to increase awareness, collaborating with faith-based and other community organizations, we can speak out against the negative images that are associated with depression. And when we do that, when we're honest, when we provide education, we provide advocacy, we look at the long-term course, when we initiate treatment early, and we network and we grow, healing ultimately gives hope. And hope is what we want. We want hope for a better future for ourselves. We want hope for a better future for our children. And we want hope for a better future for our community. So depression does impact some of the neurotransmitters in your brain. So it definitely can be chemical. It also can be related to some of the circumstances that you're in, particular relationships, death of a loved one, so a spouse, a parent, a child, financial difficulty, unemployment, a transition those are all the most important risk factors for depression. And sometimes, even if you're doing everything right, if you're holding a good job, if things in your relationship are going well, if nothing is wrong, sometimes people do slip into a depressed state for no apparent reason. And so that's why it's important to realize that it is a chronic and often recurring illness. So if you look at the risk factors for depression, socioeconomic factors are a huge risk factor, specifically poverty, living in high crime areas, low education, and low levels of employment. Among men, right, so among African American men in particular, African American men, if you compare African American men to white men, African American men have a little bit lower rates of depression compared to white men. Caribbean men have about 2 to 3 times higher rates of depression compared to white men. Now we don't know why that is yet. And this is very, very new data. We don't know why. When I say Caribbean men, I mean Caribbeans who are living in the United States. And so we don't know why that is. One thing that has been suggested is that living in those socioeconomic conditions, African American men cope by violence, by domestic violence, by drinking, and by doing drugs, and by risky sexual behavior. And so although we may not say we're depressed when asked, we're engaging in other activities that would suggest that we are. So both of those are great questions. And there was actually a recent study came out about 2 years ago that looked at postpartum depression in men. And there was a much higher rate of postpartum depression among men than was originally thought. It was about, if I remember correctly, it was almost 25%. So 1 out of 4 men were depressed after their significant other had a baby. And so it's something that it's much higher than we originally thought. In terms of racism, yes, yes, and yes. In terms of the effects of racism are having on men, African American men, and in terms of dealing with depression. I mean, especially if you're looking at the economic conditions now, black men are often the last hired and the first fired, right? If you look just in terms of income, there have been studies that show that African American men of equal qualifications are getting paid less than Caucasian men. And then there's something called post-traumatic slavery syndrome. And it's a whole body of work that talks about the effects of slavery on the psyche of the black man. And so absolutely, all of those things contribute to depression in black men.